Hello, and welcome to Employment Practices Solutions discussion today on thriving in a remote and hybrid work business model. I'm your host, Jill Rorschach. I'm president of Employment Practices Solutions, or EPS. I want to thank you for joining us today. We wanted to have a discussion on remote and hybrid work and how that's impacted all of our daily lives and professional lives. We've all seen the headlines. They keep coming out week after week, day after day. Just recently, we've seen some things. For example, the Philadelphia mayor ending remote work for all full-time city employees. Surveys that report that remote employees forced back to the office are costing a lot of money, fortunes. Remote work beating out salary, in fact, as the most important thing to employees looking to where they want to spend their careers. Also, lots of discussion about productivity and lots of research and anecdotal data around remote employees being the most productive. Several reports have found. So some organizations are continuing to mandate full return to the office, while others are taking a little bit more nuanced approach and really trying to balance hybrid schedules with organizational benefits and costs associated with that. And while the tug of war between return to office mandates and employees' desires to continue to enjoy all the things that being able to work remotely or even a hybrid schedule offer them from a personal and professional perspective, lots of HR people are finding themselves in the position of referees, trying to, balance the tug of war between leadership and employees. We want to better understand how can we work through these issues productively. And we thought that was, a good thing to have a conversation about this today. So I'm joined today by my colleague, Sheri Paulo, who's a consultant at EPS, also a longtime friend and mentor to me and my former boss in my past life. So it's good to have you here, Sheri. Sheri has really developed an interesting approach to a successful hybrid and remote work model based on her years of HR experience and most recently as the Chief Human Resources Officer for a large organization during the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic. Sheri coaches leaders and trains teams and managers to embrace what she calls the foundational five best practices that are really critical and needed to thrive in a hybrid and remote work model, with a focus really on mutual accountability. I know you're going to talk about that a little bit, Sheri, when we get to that. So again, it's great to have you join me today and share with all of us some of your just wisdom and expertise on this topic. And I want to, if we could start maybe, tell us why, Sheri, with all the experience that you have in so many areas of HR, leadership development, why hybrid and remote work? Why now? What brings us to this topic that you found so important that you developed this program about it?
Thanks, Jill. Great question. And for me, it's looking at what I see as a very complex moment right now in the makeup of workplace talent and really the way work gets done. The topic of remote and hybrid certainly is something that's been driving challenges for businesses at a much more accelerated pace due to the pandemic. But there's also some more complex, I think, workplace issues that are coming together at this moment. We've got multi-generations working in the workplace today. Some of those generations much more comfortable with digital tools and technology. And when we think about the role that those kinds of things take when shifting the way work gets done, I think this is an important moment when talking about hybrid and remote. Also, I think that for me, building leadership and managerial capability has always been a focus for me to drive business results through leaders and managers while looking at and staying connected to the pulse of employees in the workplace. Because the other dynamic happening in here, making things more complex, really is, the drive that workers have today to keep a level of balance in their life. And they're finding that through remote and not wanting to give that up. And so looking more holistically at the challenge that we're facing now and seeing hybrid and remote almost as a solution and an approach to really bring some of these other complex issues aligned together.
Yeah, yeah, really as a solution more than just a necessary evil, perhaps
Yes,
as some
exactly,
leadership
exactly.
looks at it, right? Well, so when we think about that, here we are 4 years after, sort of the summer, we were all in the throes of the pandemic, trying to muddle our way through it and figure out how we were going to pivot to remote work. What do you think are still the key challenges making this kind of a model successful?
I think that, again, I'm going to talk about building managerial capability and team capability and skills as well. Looking more closely, truly, at helping people communicate differently and more successfully in a remote and hybrid model. Having the pulse of what employees are thinking and what's working for them. I think a lot of times, leaders are trying to solve business issues, and this is one of them. Certainly, it's not a product, it's not a service, although people deliver those kinds of things, but helping leaders look and communicate more clearly with employees and with teams. So I'd say communication and building leadership capability, but also culture, right? Embedding the values and principles around remote hybrid. Those are still challenges. Organizations are doing it because they feel like they have to, but then you see that struggle in the day-to-day interaction with teams and managers, and the controversy over, well, if you were here in the office, this might be done better. When in all actuality, it's not about many times where someone is doing the work, but how they're doing the work. And so I think those are the challenges: leaders and managers building their skills around communications and looking more closely at their culture and when they engage with employees around the topic.
Yeah, yeah. You touched on culture, and it's so, I think, it's an interesting topic, and I know it's something that's really a big part of the program that you put together, and part of that focus on the training that I think is part of that program and such a critical part of it. I guess culture is sometimes hard to define, especially depending on the size of your organization. Some organizations have a lot of clear sort of core values and mission statements and things like that. But when you ask people, what to describe their culture in some of organizations, a lot of people can't do it. They might be able to recite the values and the core values and things like that, but can't really tell you what their culture is. And why do you think that's so critical, particularly, in this, age of people trying to go through, pivot to hybrid and remote work and feeling disconnected, or
Yeah,
isolated even. Tell me a
yeah.
little bit more about that.
Yeah. The first thing I want to do is just call out the fact what we're really talking about now is kind of a subset of culture. A lot of organizations have their broader cultural values, and that links to their mission and vision and who they are, and you need that to really drive a singular focus for everyone in the organization. What I'm talking about here specifically are the values and practices specifically around hybrid remote and engaging and communication in those ways and how work gets done. Because in order for these practices to really have long-term adaptability and sustainability in an organization, there has to be true value around how work gets done in a hybrid model and remotely, right? And how it gets done in the office, possibly differently, right? It's one thing to talk about it, but to really understand it and have it as core values in your organization so that you can really hold on to that long-term success that we're hearing a lot of workers are having today, right? There have been surveys out from Stanford and Harvard and Forbes and Gallup and so many other survey folks that employees and workers, not only in the US, but all over the world, are indeed finding a level of productivity and satisfaction when they're able to find this balance in a hybrid model. And so the values and the principles around it have to be something that's really embedded in the culture. Otherwise, you won't have sustainability. You'll see productivity waver, uh, and employee satisfaction and frankly engagement, and that all obviously relates to a business's bottom line, the cost, and also I think employee retention and frankly talent attraction. So when talking about culture in this particular framework, I'm really talking about the culture around the value of hybrid and remote work models.
Yeah, and I mean, when you think about that, and I hear this a lot when I'm interviewing people in investigations or doing employee focus groups and employee engagement work, a lot of people think it comes down to trust. And that's and that's, I think, a core part of culture, and it all kind of comes down to that with this question of, is work getting done even when I can't see it, right?
Yeah. Trust is always been an important and valuable cultural element in employee satisfaction and managerial success. We're talking about it a lot more in the framework of hybrid and remote because it's really coming up a lot more as people don't see each other. They don't walk around the office and see each other all the time. But, trust and accountability. And that relationship, even within a team, we often talk about the manager and the employee, but we're also talking about teams that are getting work done differently and not really sitting together, right? And so, trust comes about obviously in many different ways. In the workplace model, as people work more closely together, as they demonstrate accountability to one another in getting things done, but also in talking about what's working and not working. Right. When there's discontent around how work is getting done, the ability for everyone in the workplace, managers, leaders, workers, employees, to be able to talk about, is this working? Because I'm not feeling like we're moving as quickly as we said we would. I'm not feeling like I have what I need to get my part of this project done or this work done. And so trust comes about through honest, open communication a lot. And I think in the hybrid and remote work model, we went through a real escalated communication point at the beginning because it was so rocky and during the pandemic. And now some of that has kind of, slowed down a little bit as people are saying, well, here's my new schedule now, so I'll get my work done. And, don't worry about me. But, managers, leaders need to feel like they've got their pulse on their finger on the pulse of the work getting done in the organization, deliverables being made, and actually the team dynamic, right? We thought about it more when we were in the office because we actually could see how people were interacting together. And now managers and leaders only see it when it's up on a screen and when someone's hybrid or remote. And then you're seeing, what everyone wants you to see versus our ability to walk around an office sometimes and see it. So we have to be much more mindful around communication, reaching out to each other more often, not just to talk about the work itself, but to talk about how well the interaction and engagement is going during this time of remote work. So, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think it's a good point. It can be easy to become complacent, after sort of like, now it's 4 years later, it's not the rocky period anymore, as you mentioned. We're kind of used to it now and we've settled into our groove. We may be happy, we may be not everything's working great, but we may not make the effort unless we're being really intentional about, having regular checkpoints and discussing how well is this working and what can we do to make it better, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I want to shift gears just a little bit. I mentioned we touched on training a little bit. At EPS, we pivoted to doing almost all of our group and one-on-one coaching, group training and one-on-one coaching completely virtually, and just like we're doing here right now with people on the screens. As someone who's got so much experience coaching and leading educational programs, what impact do you think that shift has had on people's professional development, especially when we think about, younger generations coming into the workplace? Tell
Yeah.
me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I think we're definitely seeing a gap in the developmental planning and frankly talent planning in general. And trying to catch up with that, I think is really important, right? And when I say a gap, I think it's being intentional about understanding how development happens, and particularly now in the scope of remote and hybrid work, because development happens, remember, all the time. It happens in person, it happens remotely, it happens when I get a new assignment or a stretch project, and I'm working with a new team and new people. And so to think singularly that development only happens in a classroom is, I think, short-sighted for a lot of folks. And organizations are still struggling with solving this challenge. And as I talk to leaders about it, this is the conversation we have. Thinking more broadly about the development of someone and thinking how those plans look today in a more comprehensive way than they may have looked 2 or 3 years ago, which was kind of a list of developmental trainings or learnings that somebody would go through. Now it comes down to conversations with individuals around what they're doing and what they're learning from what they're doing. So being deliberate about learning that happens when someone is not in person, when they are in person, and talking about the need to be in person at times for certain experiences to really leverage what that learning has to give. And so it is a challenge, I think, that needs a lot more discussion and has to be tailored for each organization, because one size doesn't fit all. We're talking about multiple generations here. Gen Z and millennials who build relationships and have been building relationships virtually for quite a while now. And so looking at how they learn and develop, which would include all the things we've talked about already. But also, the generation that's been, in the workplace longer, and they're still building their career, right? And how they learn and develop differently. And so, I do think it's a conversation we need to be having. It is a complex one, but it definitely, to your question, it's had an impact, and I think created a gap and kind of a slowdown. When I talk to, chief people officers out there in the industries and what they're doing right now to kind of tackle this, catching up with their talent planning, which they really felt lost some momentum in the last couple of years. They really are, talking to employees and engaging them on the skills and career development that they're really looking for. And then we've got to have, more tailored plans that aren't a one size fit all.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It makes a lot of sense, and I know we're getting more requests for things like employee engagement surveys and focus groups and pulse surveys and all those kinds of things. Where I do think that a lot of organizations are really trying to make efforts to, figure out how they can, to your point, get their finger on the pulse and figure out what's working and how they don't lose sight of what the objectives are around people's development and the success of the organizations, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
So, kind of to wrap this up a little bit, Sheri, I'm just interested in, we touched on a few topics, but I'm interested in, sort of what advice you would give to leaders and to HR professionals who are struggling with these challenges around hybrid remote. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, well, I would encourage leaders and HR professionals to be having the conversation that you and I are having right now. as it specifically pertains to their organization. Let's talk about our culture around hybrid and remote. What do we really believe, and what's important to us, and how do we translate that into the workplace environment that we have? And that really ties into the core around communication and building manager capability and team skills in working in a hybrid remote environment. It's so important to look closely at your organization, the size that you are, the makeup of your workplace, the type of work that gets done, where it's getting done, and how it's getting done. So I think that starting with communication, finger on the pulse of your workforce, what's working for them in this model, and connecting that as leaders with what you want to happen. Because the tug of war between that we've been seeing in some organizations, what a leadership team wants in the organization and what workers are experiencing in their success, those two things have to come together, I think. And that's what I would say to leaders. Find out, do pulse surveys, right? Have leaders talking to their teams about what's working and what's not. And then work with your HR team in building some strong cultural plans, as well as the development component for managers and teams, as well as professional development, for sure.
Yeah. A lot of it comes back to your manager, right? That's one of those things we learned early on as an HR people, is that the manager is such a critical piece of that experience that every employee has, and whether they want to stay engaged and motivated, right?
Yeah, well, we know that survey data tells us that too, right? People leave to go. When a good manager goes, they follow them. If they're struggling with communication with their manager or feeling engaged, they're more likely to leave the organization. And so helping managers really tap into their own skill and capability around being connected with employees in this type of environment, I think is key to an organization's long-term success in this kind of work model.
Right. Because it's not going away, as we know, right?
All the indications say that it's not. There are organizations out there, as you mentioned at the beginning of our kickoff, that are requiring folks to come back to work. And we've seen it, but I think more often, those do make headlines. But I think more often, from what I'm really hearing from experts and colleagues that I know out there, they're finding the balance, Jill, right? Leaders get how valuable it is because they're employees too, right? Leaders and managers want the value of particularly a hybrid work model where they too have flexibility. And so it's not going away. And I think that what we're seeing is organizations are challenged on the talent side with keeping folks and attracting folks. Because again, as you mentioned, one of the most common questions that candidates ask is there a hybrid work model? And will I have that kind of flexibility? And we have to remember, right, there are financial impacts for businesses as well as workers when being in remote or that hybrid model. So we're not seeing it going away, but we are seeing some organizations have some great success. And those key indicators are communication, managerial capability, leveraging digital technology and tools, and equipping teams with being able to work together differently and communicate in a different way when they're not together.
Yeah. We barely touched on technology and tools, but it's such a critical part. And I know that in the program that you developed, you spend a lot of time talking about that and some of the options for that. And we have seen it appears to me, at least from the experience that I've had talking to different organizations and their HR and leadership, that the ones that have been willing to invest in, some real technology and tools to help kind of facilitate the movement of work around remote teams and things like that, have found that to be worth the investment, I think. And so, again, not enough time today for us to spend a lot of time talking on that, but I know it's something that you focus on in the program. So I want to thank you for this conversation. Your experience and perspectives are really important, I think valuable, and appreciate you sharing them. I want to thanks to those who have joined us today. You can read more about our approach, Sheri's program on hybrid and remote workplace models and challenges in our white paper, and also learn a little bit more about our services on our website. Our services do include, by the way, workplace investigations, training, coaching, leadership development, policy, and HR consulting generally. Again, we really want to focus on highlighting this hybrid and remote work model program that's been developed. I think it could be very beneficial to a lot of folks, particularly HR people, advising, and also leaders, really trying to work through some of these challenges. So our website is epspros.com, or EPS Pros. You can also listen to this conversation on both SoundCloud, and on Apple Podcasts, or watch the video on our YouTube channel. So thank you so much for joining us today. And thanks again, Sheri. It's good to see you.
Thanks for the great conversation, Jill. Take care.